Chapter 4, Social Structure and Social Interaction. The chapter begins talking about the two levels of sociological analysis, microsociology and macrosociology. As we discussed previously, symbolic interactionism is a microsociological perspective, and functionalism and conflict theory are macrosociological perspectives. So, microsociology focuses on social interaction in everyday life, and macrosociology focuses on the sociological significance of social structure. Social structure is the typical patterns of a group, such as usual relationships between men and women or students and teachers. It's the framework of society that surrounds us, and it consists of the ways that people and groups are related to one another, providing direction to and setting limits on our behavior. The major components of social structure are culture, which we talked about in the previous chapter, or chapter 2, social class, which is a composite of income, education, and occupational prestige, which we'll talk about after the first exam. We have a chapter on class. Social status, which we're talking about today, and roles, which we'll also talk about today, and then groups, which is chapter 5, and institutions, which is our whole last unit and what you'll be presenting on at the end of the semester when you do your presentation. Now this figure here, this figure, 4.1, is from the textbook, and it's supposed to show statuses. I'm not good with football, but I put it in there still for those of you that are into sports and know about these different positions. Status. Statuses are the positions we occupy. They provide guidelines for how we are to act and how we feel. A status set is all the statuses or positions an individual occupies. So me, for example, I'm a professor, I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm a daughter, I'm a member of the Society for the Study of Social Problems. I'm a graduate of Wayne State. All those kinds of things are statuses, and so our status set is all those things together. And we have two types of statuses: achieved statuses and achieved and ascribed. Ascribed statuses are positions we inherit at birth or we receive involuntarily later in life. So ascribed statuses are things like our race and our gender, and can be things like illness later in life, like cancer. Achieved statuses are positions that are earned or accomplished. So they're positions that we work for and get. So your status as a Delta College student is something you've worked for, and so it's an achieved status. My status as a professor at Delta College is an achieved status. It's something that I worked for and got a degree for first. Status symbols are indicators of our status. So your status as a college student, some status symbols for that might include your college ID, a backpack, Delta College sweatshirt, things like that, right? If you were a doctor, a status symbol would be your white coat and your stethoscope. If you're a nurse, your status symbol may be your scrubs. So those types of things are status symbols. When people go above and beyond and get really extravagant status symbols, like $700 boots or a Hummer to commute 2 miles back and forth to work a day, that's called conspicuous consumption. A master status is a status that cuts across or overshadows all your other statuses. So gender is considered a master status. People see you as man or woman no matter what your other statuses are. Also, disabilities that are visual, that you can see, can become master statuses. And so the book uses the example of Stephen Hawking. It says, although he was an amazing scientist and a great thinker, when he became disabled and was in a wheelchair, that became a master status, and people saw him as a disabled person above and beyond all other statuses. Also, when someone gets cancer, it can become a master status because it takes over everything else in their lives. Status inconsistency is when you rank high on some dimension of social status and low on others. So an example of that, a janitor who works in an expensive complex but makes more money than the people living there would be status inconsistent because janitor is low in prestige, but that job is high in pay. College professors are considered status inconsistent because we have a really high level of education, but we have a relatively low income compared to our level of education and level of prestige. A 14-year-old college student would also be status inconsistent because their age isn't consistent with being at that level of education. The behaviors and the obligations attached to our statuses are called our roles. And so we have examples in the figures below showing roles. So a status of son or daughter, your role could be to visit your mom in the hospital. Or as a student, your role is to come to class, to take notes, to study, to do the reading. My role is to provide the lecture, provide activities, create the tests, help you understand things, right? Teach sociology to you. So we have roles attached to our statuses. And my status as mother has roles such as getting my kids off, taking my kids to school, making sure my kids do their homework, making sure they're fed well, things like that. Role strain and role conflict can occur. So role strain is conflict that someone feels within a role, and role conflict is conflict that someone feels between roles. So both words have to do with a conflict, but only one has the conflict in its name. So don't let that confuse you. Role strain. We see an example here in the figures 4.4 and 5.4. 4.4 is from Henslin, 5.4 is from Valentina Roberts. So in figure 4.4, you see that if you have a status as a student and your role is to do well in your class, but you also don't want to make the other students look bad, maybe if you're answering all the questions and nobody else is getting it, you might start to worry about, should I keep raising my hand and answering, or am I making the other students look bad? That would be a strain because it's within your status as a student, roles within that status. Role conflict, you have this example, and it has you, and you have all these different statuses. You're a son or a daughter, you're a friend, you're a student, you're a worker. And your role, say you're as a son or daughter, say your mom's in the hospital, you need to visit your mom in the hospital. And as a friend, your friend is having a 21st birthday party and you need to go to their party. But you also had, if you had an exam the next day, and then you get called into your job for emergency overtime. You have all these different statuses and these roles where you need to visit the mom in the hospital, but you need to go to the 21st birthday, and you need to prepare for your test, and you need to come in for emergency overtime, and you have all this going on at the same time. That's role conflict. And so I really like that example, but sometimes people like this example better visually. So you have the statuses like athlete and friend and employee and son and daughter, student. And then it shows that the role strain is within your role as friend. So maybe in your role as friend, you saw your friend's significant other cheating on them. And as a good friend, you want to be honest with your friend and tell your friend, but at the same time, you don't want to hurt your friend. That would be a role strain because you're conflicted within that status as friend. Where, say you're a student and an athlete, which is here, and you want to get good grades and you want to spend time studying, but you also have all these athletic competitions and you're trying to work on your physical and your role as a student, and you want the time to study, but you want to participate in your sport, that could become a role conflict because you're conflicted between your status as student and your status as an athlete. Social groups we'll talk about more in Chapter 5, so this is just a brief discussion on groups. A group is two or more people who interact with each other because of shared interests, goals, experiences, and needs. So we see people in other places, and we have a different idea about what group is maybe before this class, and outside of sociology we might see a bunch of people in a supermarket and call that a group of people, but in sociology we don't call that a group of people. We call that an aggregate because the people aren't there with a sense of belonging to being there. Their membership isn't well defined. There aren't a lot of rules for the behavior. They're not there, because they want to be together. Also, there are categories, which are another thing that we normally call groups. So all the African Americans we could call, it's a category. White is a category. Delta students would be a group, but if you were talking about college students, it would just be a category. Well, maybe not. Anyways, so, oops. Yeah, that's good. And then social institutions, which we will talk about the whole last unit of the class at the end of the semester, are the standard or usual ways a society meets its basic needs. And so functionalists identify 5 basic needs society must meet to survive: replacing members, socializing new members, producing and distributing goods, preserving order, and providing a sense of purpose. And so families help produce new members of society, right? As people die off, families have new babies and bring in new people. Socializing new members, those are our agents of socialization, are responsible for socializing new members. So we have family, religion or church, education, right? Maybe the media, indirectly, are agents of socialization. So they're responsible for socializing the new members and helping them learn the values and beliefs of that culture. I guess the laws could do that as well in some ways by maintaining the social norms. Then preserving order, of course, we have law that helps to maintain social order. We have the military that helps preserve order, and politics preserve order. And then providing a sense of purpose. For some, medicine provides a sense of purpose, being able to heal the sick and injured or care for the dying. For some, education provides a sense of purpose. Religion can provide a sense of purpose in people's lives. And science can also preserve or provide a sense of purpose. Conflict theorists agree that these institutions were designed to meet the basic needs, but they don't believe that they work harmoniously for the good, which functionalists do believe. And as it comes time to start working on your presentation later in the semester, you will want to refer back to this figure 4.2. It's in your textbook because it breaks down each of the institutions. It breaks down what basic needs they take care of. It breaks down some different groups and organizations within those institutions, statuses that people have within those institutions, some of their values, and then some of the norms. So it will help you be able to break down how to compare this other country and the United States in each of the institutions you have to talk about for the presentation, which are going to be family, religion, education, politics, and economy. So this is the discussion we had in class. I asked students which 2 of the major social institutions do you think are the most influential and why? And which 2 are the least influential and why? And I forgot to put media on the slide, so you can include media on this. And then, can America survive without any of them? So if you miss class and you're listening to this, you can go ahead and do this and turn it in for your participation points for that day. The micro level, symbolic interactionists study aspects of social interaction. So macro, social structure; micro, social interaction. And so symbolic interactionists, as we said, are the key theorists here. And they focus on different things such as stereotypes, personal space, eye contact, smiling, body language, conversation, etc., right? Language, oral language as well. So stereotypes, as you know, are there assumptions that people make about groups of people that are not necessarily true. And then personal space, we look at personal space in different cultures and can compare it and see how it's different and how the society determines what different personal spaces look like. So we have 4 categories in our culture of personal space. We have intimate distance, which is up to 18 inches from your body. Personal distance, which is 18 inches to 4 feet from you. Social distance, which is 4 feet to 12 feet. And public distance, which is more than 12 feet. So intimate distance is reserved for people you're really close to, and usually for times of like showing affection or comforting someone, like when you give them a hug or whatever. That's the only time you normally would have people up in your space like that. Personal distance is the distance that you would probably normally keep from your friends and others around you. Even if people stand in lines at the store or in line to buy tickets for a concert or whatever, you maintain this 18 inches to 4 feet. Social distance is the distance you would keep in a formal setting. So if you were being interviewed or you were interviewing someone, you would probably stay 4 to 12 feet away from that person. Public distance is the distance you stay from public figures, maybe politicians. If you were at a concert, you would probably be more than 12 feet away from that person performing. And in the book, they gave the example of the professor who was teaching in Latin America and had a student come to talk to them and got in a space that they weren't used to, and they're not in American culture. And so they became really uncomfortable with it and started to back away. But as they backed away, the student became uncomfortable because of the distance, and started to not be able to articulate himself because he was uncomfortable, because he felt like he was doing something wrong while the professor was moving away from him. And so the professor had to realize that that's a difference in culture, and that social distance and personal space is socially constructed, and in this culture it's different, and he had to stand his ground, stay where he was, and let the guy get into the space to let him feel comfortable. Eye contact is also something symbolic interactionists have studied, and there are several really good examples in your reading about times when people use eye contact and it's seen as flirting or it's seen as confrontational, whereas at other times eye contact is expected. In some cultures they expect children to make eye contact with adults. In other cultures that's not acceptable. So that's something that we socially construct, what's acceptable and not acceptable as far as eye contact is concerned. The same is true with smiling. They talked about smiling in Germany, I believe, and that the people got upset when the cashier smiled at them because that went against their cultural norms. And then we've talked already quite a bit about body language and how body language can mean different things in different cultures. And we can also study body language to understand how people use body language within even your own culture. 3 kind of mini theories within symbolic interactionism are dramaturgy, ethnomethodology, and the social construction of reality. And so dramaturgy is, or dramaturgical analysis, is analyzing the world analyzing life in terms of drama. And it was developed by Irving Goffman. And he talked about how we try to present ourselves in a certain way. So we do self-impression management, or we do impression management. And so we behave in ways that we want other people to see us and try to put the impressions we want, which is kind of like what we talked about Looking Glass Self, right? But we're talking about how we present ourselves. So we may present ourselves differently in school and class than we present ourselves with our families. And we may, if we have religious groups, we may present ourselves even differently there. And we may present ourselves differently in a job interview than we would present ourselves if we were at a party. And so he said that all these different places are like different movies or different scripts. And then that's our front stage behavior when we deliver our lines in our different plays. And our backstage behavior is when we're at home all by ourselves and we can just let our hair down and be the real us without trying to worry about presentation of self. Ethnomethodology was developed by Harold Garfinkel, and it explores background assumptions. And so he had his students go out and break background assumptions and see how people reacted. And he found some really interesting things. So he had students go home and call their parents Mr. and Mrs. whatever. So say the student's name is John Smith. He would go home and call his parents Mr. and Mrs. Smith. And the parents would, they're breaking the background assumption. We don't normally behave that way. So by doing that, it made some of the parents really angry and made some of them disturbed, or some of them confused. And so it shows how our background assumptions really affect how we behave, and when people go against them, it changes how we react, and we don't know what to think. Also, we have the social construction of reality and the Thomas theorem, which states if people define situations as real, they are real in their consequences. And so this is the idea that we socially construct all of our reality. We understand what's going on in our world because of the way we socially construct it. And things aren't necessarily real in and of themselves, like race, which we will talk about more when we get to the race chapter, but race is defined differently in different cultures. The way we define race in our culture has changed over time. And that shows us that race isn't really real, but the consequences of race are real, so it makes race real. And next we did a group activity where students had to find out how many friends or acquaintances they had in common with members of their group, which led into our chapter 5.